when you get in that churn of, I've got to make money, I've got to make money, I've got to make money, I've got to pay payroll, got to pay payroll, got to do with this, got to do that. You're passing your anxiety onto your team when that's not what you should be doing. And that job taught me a lot of that. It was chaos. It was definitely chaos. I mean, but it also gave me a lot of chance to help them all grow. I was doing one-on-ones with them and I was figuring out what they wanted to be. And all of that team has gone on to senior design roles in other companies or with that company. And I feel really proud of that. But I was done. I didn't work for 3 months after that job. I was toast. So, yeah. I think having burnout yourself makes you a more compassionate leader. Nobody should get to being a compassionate leader from being burned out, but I think it definitely gives me a different perspective. That job definitely gave me a different perspective of what that is.
Sometimes part of being resilient and maintaining that necessary resilience, that ability to bounce back, means taking a rest at the appropriate time, recognizing the signs of burnout before you actually hit burnout, doing something preemptive to avoid that. Welcome back to Leading with Integrity. Today is our second episode in the short series we're doing this month on resilience, and my guest today has a pretty unique perspective on that, whether it be as a result of becoming a leader during the COVID pandemic, advocating for better healthcare, or having a successful career whilst also managing chronic illness. That guest is Catherine Hicks, who has many lessons to share on what resilience looks like, how to build or grow a more resilient team, and the impact of effective leadership in that context and beyond.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Catherine, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell everyone a bit about yourself, your background, your career so far, what you do today, why you do it, as much as you'd like to share, really.
Sure. So my name is Catherine, and I am a product design consultant primarily based out of the San Francisco Bay Area in the United States. And I've been doing this for 25, almost 26 years now in some form or capacity. I work a lot with early stage startups, kind of helping them get their feet from a design standpoint. And I've primarily been a consultant that entire time. I've done great work for big companies, like I've worked at Amazon and I've worked at Apple, but primarily I work with companies that are just getting started, and that's kind of my sweet spot. We have a team of 15 designers that kind of came to fruition. I kind of became a leader during the pandemic. I had always been just a sole freelancer before that, and a lot of my friends were losing their jobs, and I had a corporation and I had payroll set up, and I'm like, yeah, just come and let me kind of be your conduit to be able to do freelance work and do it in a legal way where the taxes are taken out and everything. And then 5 years later now, 4.5, 5 years later, I now have a agency with 15 employees. It was never the path I thought I would take in terms of leading in this way. But leading and mentorship has always been something that I have done. I'm also a design educator and teacher. And so that's always been kind of how I've shown leadership in the mentoring and guiding of new students. So this business thing is a relatively new adventure. And I love it. We're a great team and we get to do great things together. But it's definitely been a very interesting journey in my leadership challenge. Personally, I'm also a disability advocate. I live with chronic illness and disabilities. So that's also something I advocate for within design, making sure design is accessible, and also outside design in terms of healthcare policy, accessibility, and other things important to the specific disabilities I have in my community. So I kind of look at leadership from a lot of different angles.
So becoming a leader during COVID, I feel like there must be a particularly interesting set of experiences there, because most people, I think, when going into COVID, they were either sort of that early career and just got sent home or furloughed or whatever it was called, or they were well established, or at least established leaders who'd had experience of it pre-pandemic. And so I don't want to say they would have been set in their ways, but do you know what I mean?
Oh, you can say that. I think that's probably an accurate statement. I think a lot of leaders get stagnant, and that's always why I shied away from leadership roles in my professional life. I love teaching, I love mentoring, I hope guiding and leading the next generation of leaders, but I have found that 90% of the leaders I've had on projects and work were very rigid because they had stepped away from doing what they loved, doing the design, and they became management. And when I would look at some of the leaders I had a couple great ones, but most of the time it was very hard to work with a leader who was out of touch with what I was doing. And so that was always the reason why I balked at leadership and didn't want those roles. I mean, I had plenty of opportunity to go into design leadership, and I just looked at it and went, I love what I do too much to be in meetings 10 hours a day and not doing what I love. And so I think set your ways is a pretty accurate statement for a lot of leaders, not out of wanting to be that way or making a conscious decision to be that way, but leadership takes you away from the day-to-day operations of what you're doing and takes you more into the bigger vision of it. You will get kind of pulled away from the understanding of what your team is doing if you're not really careful and really deliberate about doing it. And so building the company during the pandemic, I didn't see it as building a company. I just saw it as helping friends. So it was a much different thing than I think stepping into a leadership position would have been in doing it in a more formal way. I was just like, oh, I have this tool that I can help my friends get freelance work when they need it because they're all being furloughed. It wasn't, I'm going to start a company and hire employees. I think if I'd gone in with that tact, I don't think I would have ever done it, to be perfectly honest. So I went in going, I have this tool, which is my company structure, my physical company structure based in the United States, all the taxes, all the loopholes you have to run through. Let me just use it to help my friends. And then what that came through over time was the ability to work together on things and work on collaborative things. So someone would bring in a project that was more developer focused. And then one of my developer friends would say, I have time to work on that with you. It became a collaboration of a team of people I'd worked with before. Everyone who is my employee used to be a coworker of some sort, whether they were a client who came in and did design work. I did design work for them, or they were on a team I worked on within a client. Everyone is someone I knew. So I didn't walk into leadership in a very traditional way because I don't think I ever would have taken the step into doing that if it was presented to me as, oh, you're going to be the boss and you're going to have 15 people on payroll and you're going to have to worry about all the stuff that comes with that. I would have never done it. So I was just blessed that it kind of happened organically during the first 6 months of the pandemic, where we were all kind of just working together. And as the pandemic waned and we all kind of went, what do we want to do next? We all wanted to stay working together. And I'm like, that's fine. I've kind of figured it out. It's been a year and a half. I've kind of figured out how to make this work. And, I hesitate to say I own a company. I like to say I lead a collective more so, because everyone works on things outside of the company. Inside of the company, you bring things in, you bring things out. I don't look at it as being a boss in probably the sense that most people would think when I say I run an agency. So that's also different. I think it also fits my personality and my way of approaching how to interact with people more than, and my leadership style more than a traditional manager coworker kind of situation.
Fair enough. I think what strikes me though is something you've said there, and what I think is true of some of the best leaders, maybe the most good people. I don't know. Your leadership, I think, from the way you've explained it, it really came from a place of service. How can I help people? And I think that is quite telling as well about the subsequent success.
Yeah. And I think that's really true. I looked at teaching always as a service to give back to the next generation. And I think running the company was started as the ultimate act of service, right? It was, let me help you be able to be a functional adult human being in a time where nobody knew what was going on. I could give you this level of stability of, at least if you find work, you don't have to worry about setting up a business structure in the middle of a pandemic when the whole world is closing. And I look at design in general, whether I'm doing design or managing designers or teaching designers as an act of service, because creation is an act of service. You're building something for another purpose outside of yourself, whether that's a painting, a line of code, a strategy, whatever that is. Every job is creative in some form. So therefore every job is an act of service in some form or fashion. Right. And so I've never walked into any leadership situation, and they've been vast and very different over my career, inside tech and outside tech and design, as a feeling like I know everything about everything. Those are the kind of managers that drive me nuts, and I've had plenty of those. And B, I'm here to make your job easier. Excuse my language here, but the best piece of advice I ever got was from a manager who told me, you are a shit umbrella, meaning you are the one who puts up the umbrella and keeps all the garbage away from your team. And, and that is the best description of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And it is one that stuck with me early on in my career. And I know we'll talk about it later. He was my favorite, best mentor that I got a lot of how I approach leadership from. And when you have a manager telling you that is my job, so if you're getting garbage, that is my job. That's literally what he described his job to be to me. And I've held on to that as I've gone into leadership. And that is your job. Your job is of service. And that service is to make sure your people can do their job without worrying about all the things that they don't need to worry about. They don't need to worry about that our payroll got screwed up 2 weeks in a row and I'm trying to figure that out. They don't need to know a client is being an absolute jerk and I needed to slap his hands last week. Both of those things just happened in the last month, in the month of December. My team has no clue that those things are going on, nor should they. They should be able to do their work and be supported and guided in their work. And so, yeah, my job is a service-oriented job, whether I'm doing the design or leading the designers. And I think if you walk in with that humble nature, you're always going to be able to strive to be better. I think if you walk in feeling you know it all and you know everything about everything and everyone's going to do it my way or the highway, that's not going to work. It's just not. I have a team of 15 people who do 4 different kinds of jobs who are all very individual people. So I'm not going to be able to walk in like that. And that ego is not something I've ever had. I'm good about I'm good at my job and I've been doing it long enough I can say that comfortably, but I don't have an ego about it because there's still, even in this job doing it as long as I have, there's always something new to learn. There's always something new to engage with. And leadership has just been a great journey on that, of really realizing what I didn't know in the beginning. And the uncertainty of the pandemic was definitely part of that as well. We didn't know what was going to happen day to day. And so it was stressful to be leading, figuring out how to lead in that time, but also really beneficial to have something to focus on outside the world collapsing outside my door. So it really helped me stay focused on figuring it out in a way that if the world had been normal, I don't know if I would have put so much focus and energy towards it in the way I did to make sure I was giving everyone what they needed.
Yeah, I was laughing there because I think, I've heard the umbrella phrase before. And
I love it.
And it makes me chuckle every time because it's that thing about language, isn't it? So in the UK, that phrase, if someone said that to you, that would be saying that you're not very good at being an umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's why I also clarified where I came from in the beginning of the conversation, right? Because I can get away with so many British put downs and most people here don't catch them. So I spent time in the UK. That's why I said I'm an American, and let's just be sure about that because but yeah, you're the other way it's been transferred to me is you're the trash funnel, you're where all the trash comes in. Does it get recycled? Does it get thrown out? That's another way I've had it described that might be a little more palatable for your audience. But the bottom line is your job is to shield your team from
Absolutely. I think the underlying message is the important part, definitely. And I completely in agreement with you there.
And I think that's something I always tell people, if you're a good leader, you're not going to know what I'm doing day to day. If I'm a good leader, you're not going to know the fires I'm putting out for you because that's my job. You're not supposed to know those things. And I think that coming into leadership in the way I did, I had done other leadership before that, meaning I'd run projects and stuff, but leading a team of people for a long term was definitely different. And so coming into that, there was a lot that I went back to my mentor and thanked him for, because I realized all the stuff that I wasn't hearing day to day that he was putting up with for me. Right. And I think I think running a business, everyone has this glamorous idea of being a business owner, and I wish that would go away because it's so much work. But the bottom line is too, is we're supposed to make it look easy. That's our job. So it's this conundrum of people coming to me and saying, I want to start a business. And I'm like, oh, let's backtrack here and give you a little dose of realism of what I do in a day. And then if you want to do it, we can have that conversation. And most people are very shocked when they start running their own business of everything they have to do. And so that was no different for me. I mean, I had different levels of experience with it, but running a business of one is much different than running a business of 15. Certain things are the same, like paying your taxes and invoicing and stuff, but it has another level of complexity the more people you add. So.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, one of our topics that we're here to talk about really is this word resilience. And the reason I find it so interesting, so I did a New Year episode at the beginning of the year, and a couple of phrases came up a lot in terms of reflections on last year and what's going to be important in the future. One of them was managing expectations. And another one, I think, was resilience, or, by another name. And so I wanted to really get into that. So particularly given the story you've told so far and the other things that I know about your background and your situation, what does that word resilience mean to you for your career and for life as well?
Well, I think living with chronic illness and disability pretty much since birth, I have a very probably unique vantage point in that. And personally, it's just getting up and doing things when you don't want to, getting up when things are hard and difficult. And then also resilience for me, and this may not be for everyone, is also realizing when it's okay to take a break. Resilient, you have to recharge to be able to be resilient. And that's probably the biggest thing I've learned as both someone who lived experience as a disabled person and a business owner and a graduate school student. That's been the last year and a half. On top of that, it's a lot on the plate. And sometimes resilience is knowing when you need to retreat for your mental health, for your physical health, for your sanity, for the other people around you, so you don't lose your absolute ever-loving mind at them. Sometimes resilience is understanding that no is okay, right? We put in the society, and I think I don't know if this is just an American thing or if this is more a global thing. I really do think this is very tied into American exceptionalism, that we tie our worth to how much we work and how hard we work and how high we climb the corporate ladder. And I haven't taken a vacation in 6 years. That kind of mentality is very prominent here. And I think that doesn't lead to resiliency. That leads to burnout. So resiliency to me also has the idea of taking time for yourself, taking time for your family, taking time for the things that matter is part of resiliency to me, because there are days I'm recording this in my bed in my PJs right now because the last week has been hard physically and I haven't been working. And knowing that I don't have to push through everything is going to allow me to push through when I need to. That day I have a deadline and my body is not cooperating and I'm in pain. I can do that, but I also know when not to do that. And resilience as a leader is knowing that you're going to fail. Just knowing you're going to fail. You're going to screw something up. You're going to hurt somebody's feelings. You're going to be way more aggressive than you intend to. You're going to miss the mark with a policy. There's going to be something you're going to do that is going to be wrong as a leader. And resilience is being humble enough to take the time to learn from those things, right? It's not about fall down 7, get up 8 times. That's only a small part of what resilience is. You have to have the right mindset to go into it. And if you go into it going, everything that happens is a potential for learning, you're going to be more resilient, right? And so for me, it's kind of all those things combined, especially as a leader. I really just look at modeling what I feel being a good human is. For example, I'm very much about take a day. You don't have to tell me why, those kinds of things, because I don't want my team, you have resilience and you have burnout, and they're two sides of the same coin. It's just how you kind of deal with the energy levels and what needs to be done. Sometimes we need to push through. Sometimes we need to just fall down 7 and get up 8. But I think resilience is far more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and I really like that you've almost framed resilience as the opposite of burnout there as well. because I think these are two, I mean, they're definitely connected issues, aren't they? And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's other places in the world where this is true as well. I think for the UK, we're fairly similar, I think, in terms of working culture, maybe not to the same level of exceptionism, to use your word, or extremes, to use my word. But certainly, I mean, there is, even now, I mean, it is getting better, I think, in a lot of workplaces, particularly in the smaller businesses and the startups and the more sort of naturally forward-looking sort of organizations. But still, there is that almost stigma around taking time off just because you need a day sometimes. About even taking sick days, like we have by no means the same strict, almost militant views that I think corporate America does about that sort of thing. They're certainly not rationed in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think
but
it's starting.
People will notice if you take a lot of sick time. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and as someone with a disability, that's something I deal with constantly. Right.
Yeah,
I think that's also part of the reason why I don't fit into corporate America. And I have gone the route of a freelancer and a consultant. Right. There are days when I say before COVID, when 9 to 5 in the Monday through Friday in the office was more the norm, I got called out on the carpet a lot for missing a lot of days, where it became a problem with some jobs I was doing, where I had to explain to them, this is an accommodation I'm asking for under our disability laws. I'm not just sitting at home eating bonbons. I'm seriously could not get in the car and drive an hour. And I can tell you that's seen as a weakness, where I could still work. I'm recording this podcast in bed, right? And I think COVID kind of opened those doors, and I'm afraid a lot of the return to office stuff that's going on here in the United States may be closing them again. But I'm very vocal about the fact that yesterday was a high pain day, and I got online and I got on LinkedIn and I said, here's the 20 things I've had to think about today before I even got out of bed to decide if I could work today. And it was a long list. It was, is my cat's feeders fed? Do I need to go call my doctor to go to the emergency room? Is my computer set up? How late can I sleep in before I'm missed on projects? What do I absolutely cannot redo today? It was a list of 20 different things that most people didn't even think about. They get up, they brush their teeth, they shower, they eat breakfast, and they go to work. And so, when we talk about that kind of stuff, it's really important for people like me to speak about my experiences. And that's why I do the advocacy work I do, especially in the tech community, where I have talked to a guy about working on a project where he expected me to be available to him 7 days a week. Not going to happen. We work 6 days a week, 8 hours a day at a minimum, is what he said to me. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Have a nice day. This isn't going to work for me.
Yeah, right.
Even if I was perfectly healthy, that wouldn't work for me.
No, I was going to say, that's unreasonable in any situation. But yeah.
But that's a lot of the culture of how Silicon Valley was built. Like, I've been doing this since before the year 2000. So I've been doing this a long time, but that's 80, 90 hour weeks is still kind of, although it's changing, it's oftentimes seen as the norm in startup culture a lot. And I don't work like that. I've never worked like that because, number one, I can't. Even if I could, I really would love to have a life outside of that. And if you're not if your company is all about work, then you're not the company for me. And as a leader, I never want my team to feel like that's what I'm expecting of them either. So my general thought in running this company, it's become a company, is I always tell it to my team like this. I don't care what you do, when you do it, how you do it. I expect my clients to be happy, their deadlines to be met, and you to be available to them when they need you. Otherwise, I could care less. If I am coming to talk to you about any of these topics, you've screwed up somewhere. I am here to help you if you need help. I am here to guide you and help you learn new things. We're going through it these next 2 weeks. We always put a new learning goal on the team. Team members, at least one new thing they want to learn, and we help guide them through that through the year, whether that's a designer who wants to code, a coder who wants to design, a designer who wants to learn marketing. I always make that a focus. If they want to make it a focus, we make it a focus to help them. But I never want my team to feel like I expect them to be available. I expect their phones to be off by 8 p.m. wherever they are, at the very, very latest. I said, I'm probably going to send you a message at 2 a.m. I don't expect an answer right away, because it's just, I'm up early. I'm up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, because that's when I work best. If you work best at 10 o'clock at night, great. I don't want your phone. I don't want you checking Slack on the weekends. I don't want you doing that. And I think my team is happy and has hung around for as long as they have because they can work in ways that make sense for them. And I think what a lot of people are missing with this return to work kind of edict is exactly what people are losing. And they're going to get people in who are not happy. And I just don't care. And my clients don't care. They don't care where you are. They just care that the work is done and the work is good. And I understand that's such a privilege because not every industry can do that. But my industry can. And there's no reason that people should be pushed back into an office who don't want to be there. Now, having said that, I love working in an office with my clients. So if they're local, I'll go in anytime they want. But going into an office every day is not conducive to creativity and in the way that I work. So I just don't do it. But I think, for me, making sure the team is happy in their work environment is key because happier people produce better work. It's really that simple. And I think so many people in corporate America, at least, are losing sight of that at the thought of losing sight of their power. But really what they're doing is giving their team more power to make them look better. And I just wish they'd see that,
Yeah, and I agree with pretty much everything you said. In fact, everything you said. So to me, this whole and it encompasses all of these issues, I think. But so the return to office, that whole startup and the hustle culture and the 60, 90-hour work week, all of that rubbish, frankly. It's just textbook definitions to me of having your priorities wrong when it comes to quantity versus quality.
Yeah.
And I've worked in similar, not quite to that same extreme in terms of the hours per week, but partly because I was just difficult at times and refused to do it. Similar sort of startup culture though. And
no, you weren't difficult. You stood up for your boundaries.
I was described as difficult, is what I meant.
Yeah. And that is something I can tell you as a woman in a male dominated industry. So for the first 12 years I worked in tech, I was the only woman on every project I worked on for probably until 2012 was probably the first time I worked on a team with other women, like in any position within the company. And I will say I wear difficult proudly. I wear hard to work with proudly because it usually 9 times out of 10, it's because I've set a boundary you're not comfortable with. So I just wanted to call that out because being called difficult and being difficult are two different things.
Absolutely, you are correct. I mean, there were times I was also difficult on purpose.
Yeah,
but we won't go into that.
I have burned a few bridges and done and lit the match very deliberately. I can do that, but oftentimes and that's something we internalize. That I want to make sure that if you're internalizing that and listening to this as being told you're being difficult when all you're doing is standing up for yourself, that's not what difficult is. Difficult is. An example I will give you, a manager who told me my work sucked and I should go home and bake cookies.
I mean, that's beyond difficult, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, difficult is the guy who talked over me in every meeting for 6 months and then got mad at me when I didn't do what he told me to do. That's difficult, but standing up for yourself, you should never see yourself as being difficult. If you're doing it respectfully, you're doing it, not doing it at the sake of other people's work and emotions. If you're saying this is not good for me and here's why, you should never be labeled difficult, but you will be. That's just part of the thing. And I can tell you 90% of my clients right now are not happy with me in some form or fashion because I've done that for myself and my team. And when you get into leadership, you have to realize that that's just part of it. That's just part of it. When you get into a leadership role, being difficult is part of how you move the needle and get things done. I'm not going to sit and let my team be yelled at. I'm not going to sit and let my team be worked hard beyond what they've paid us to do. So I wear difficult as a badge of honor. When you call me difficult, I go, okay, why am I difficult? Am I difficult? And I'll say it to somebody. I'll say, why am I difficult? Am I difficult because I'm challenging you? Am I difficult because I don't agree with you? What do you mean by that? And usually when you ask someone what they mean by that, they can't give you a really good answer other than you're just being difficult. And I'm like, well, okay, let's backtrack. I'm standing up for my team. Here's why. Or I'm standing up for myself. Here's why. And why is it difficult for you to do? Is it difficult for you to accommodate? Is it making you uncomfortable? I'm that person. I'm that person who will poke at your insecurities because you're presenting it in a way that doesn't make sense to me. I'm very analytical when it comes to stuff like that. But being difficult is sometimes putting in boundaries that people don't want to honor. And so I just wanted to call you out on that before you continued, because that's just one of my own personal things that I've had to work through personally as a leader, being called that a lot and a lot worse things. That I just had to say something.
No, and thank you for doing it. And you're absolutely right to do it as well. It was poor choice of words, but I think
but honestly, when we hear that and we're told that, it sits in our mental Rolodex. Like that comment about going home and baking cookies was 23 years ago. That happened to me. And it's still in my brain. We hold on to those things, and sometimes it's hard to break free of them, but that's one I've worked really particularly hard on. So
yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm glad it was 23 years ago and not last week, but still.
Well, last week was a different endeavor. I was called a stupid girl for not doing something someone wanted me to do. So,
oh man.
Fortunately, I can tell you, it's definitely from the early 2000s to now, it's definitely become far less, because there are more women in positions of leadership now. Not nearly enough, but there are more positions of women in leadership. There are more women doing what I do, so I don't feel so isolated. But it still happens. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that being a female leader in a predominantly male-oriented industry of technology doesn't come without some of that every once in a while. But it used to be way more constant than it is now. So there is progress. But yeah, that guy was an interesting individual, and I just kind of went, no, I'm one semester away from a master's. I think I'm somewhat intelligent. Have a nice day.
Yeah, that former client, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, not even a client. Not even a client.
Well, good. Yeah.
So was not someone I had to deal with more than that initial conversation where he yelled at me, and I was like, you get to yell at me once. You get to yell at me once. Everybody can have a bad day. You don't get to do it a second time. You just don't. So.
Yeah, quite right too. Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, so what you've said there about sometimes the leader has to be difficult. I think yes, and I think there's two ways to look at that as well. Like if you're the leader and in your head you think someone is being difficult, I think that to me is a flag, if you like. Maybe not a red one yet, but it's a sign that you need to have a think about that situation, the way you're viewing it, and possibly the way you're behaving as well. Because even if, and that's a big if, but even if that person is in fact being difficult, that's not usually step one. Something else has happened. What has happened that has resulted in that? Think about that, because it might have been something you did. And I think, again, exactly some of the scenarios you've described already, and certainly some of the things that I experienced in my own startup journey. Too many of us, I think, it becomes that like really tense confrontational moment way too easily. And very often that manager mindset kicks in, doesn't it? And you're like, well, I'm the boss. I must be right. I'm not going to back down.
Yeah.
And we've all seen teams implode as a result of that.
Yeah. Ego is the death of so many startups. Like I work a lot with the founders of startups. Those are usually the people who are hiring me. And the first thing I do is if it's a founder team, I sit in a room and I say, okay, what was your last fight about? What was your last argument about? How do you approach leadership? How do you approach leadership? And I can tell you a lot of really great startups I've worked with have failed because of the ego of the founders. The ego of the ultimate leaders of the organization could not get in alignment. So when I come into a situation, if I'm coming into a situation, it's been bad for a long time. My team does not necessarily come to me to handle things without trying to handle it themselves first, because I've empowered them to do that. I've empowered them to speak for themselves, to stand up for themselves, knowing whatever they say, as long as they're not completely sexist, racist, homophobic, whatever, even if I don't agree with it, I'm going to stand up alongside them to the client and I'm going to chew their behinds out in private. But if my team is coming to me saying, I can't deal with this, then it's already been tried to be handled. Then I'm going to come in as a mama bear, and I'm going to come in a little aggressive because my team knows that I've got their back. I need to have their back. But when it comes to internal teams communications, it's much more, or we haven't gotten to that point where it's a known entity yet. I always try to come in with a series of understanding of where the problem lies. Why are you feeling this way? What can we do to resolve this for you? Coming in as a humble leader is great. And then if the pattern repeats itself, it's a pattern, then you've tried your best, then sometimes you have to get a little harder and a little meaner. Internally with my team, they just know they can be brutally honest with me. I've always told them, I'm like, you're not going to get fired. You're not going to get laid off. I cannot get better unless you tell me what I need to get better at. And I think that goes back to the seeing leadership, like you said, as service rather than dictatorship. I mean, I could very easily run this company as a dictator and say, this is the way we're going to do things. But that's not going to make me happy because that's against who I am as a person. And it's not going to make anybody else happy. So I always tell them, we do quarterly check-ins. We do every other week, hour-long check-ins, so one-on-ones. We do quarterly strategy plannings based on our annual goals, and then we do annual planning at the end of the year. Like, what kind of projects do you want to be working on? What do you want to learn this year? That kind of stuff. And so I'm always checking in with them. And we use an online tool called Lead Honestly, which is an online tool to kind of facilitate one-on-ones, which is hugely helpful. So they'll get a list of questions that I want answered every week and then throw special questions in. But the first question is one of the first questions I ask is, what could I have done better for you this week? It's a simple question, and they know they can answer it honestly because I've taken their feedback. Some people are very afraid to talk to their managers. Oh, my manager doesn't want me to be honest. But when you're honest about your own faults and you understand when you screw up and you go back to them and go, I screwed this up, then they understand that you really mean it, right? There's got to be a level of humbleness, but there also has to be that number where you can just get serious and stand up for them too. It's a combination. And it's what I'm still learning, right? I tend to go probably a little too far to each extreme and not stay in the middle. If I say anything about my leadership style that I know I need to work on, I'm either like, really like, oh my God, this client is driving you nuts. Let me go in and like kill it with fire. Or I'm so timid and I'm so weak and I'm just trying to see what you're going to do because I don't want to step on your toes. So trying to find that middle ground has been really the part of my leadership journey with this. With clients, working directly with clients, I'm a much different person being a design leader than a leader of a design team. I feel when I'm the design leader and I'm hired to be the subject matter expert, it's a much different conversation. You're hiring me for my skills and you're not listening to my skills, I'm definitely going to be more aggressive. Leading a design team has way more people involved in it. It's a different thing, right? And so when I'm working one-on-one with clients individually taking on projects, which I will still do, I think that's vitally important as a leader to never step fully out of what kind of work you're leading. So I will always have at least one, sometimes two projects that I take on to work for myself to not lose touch with the day-to-day of what I do. That was taught to me by my mentor, who, when he was working as our leader, he was working right alongside us on stuff too. And I just found that so inspiring to do that, but also in working with him for the 15 years since we worked together, also understand why he was doing that now. So, leadership has different forms, whether if you're hired as a subject matter expert, you are the leader of that thing. That's where I can be more aggressive, but leading a design team is a much different, too many moving parts to be too aggressive. So I'm still finding where those balances lie.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and particularly that concept, and this is something that I have struggled with in the past, of making sure you're always keeping your hand in. I think so. There are industries and there are specialisms where that doesn't work or it's not possible. Yeah. So for one example, so let's say, the tech team is quite a good example, isn't it? Particularly if it's like a distributed one even, or if it's not everyone in that team has the same skill set. So even if you do have some development knowledge or a tech background, if you're leading the team, the chances of you being able to do the specialism of everyone in that team is, pretty low, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think why that practice is powerful is because it's showing that you're not just like high and mighty and lording it over people and never doing any of the work. So I think there are other ways you can do it. So you can help with like the admin or something, or clean the kitchen, or, whatever.
Yeah, I think even if you're just doing your specialty, like I have a team of engineers, but they see me doing what I'm good at, right? They don't see me in the office in the corner office with my door closed. I think it doesn't necessarily need to be that you're doing everything your team does, because that's sometimes, like you said, I don't code, I don't do that, but I have engineers on my team. But what they see is that humble nature, that you're not afraid to work. that you're not just telling them what to do, but you're getting in there and doing it with them in the way that you're capable of. Like, I have highly technical teams across marketing, across development, across design. I'm a designer. That's what I do. So that's the area where I can contribute to the team as a whole outside of leadership. But what that shows my team is that I still understand what it's like to do design on a deadline. Or development or work on a deadline. I still understand how to build for a long-term vision. So there's a lot of things, even if you're only doing something in your own specialty, that can show your team, your broader team, that you're still really in the trenches with them. I think that goes further than assuming that you need to learn to code and assuming you need to learn everything everybody on your team does. But just be humble enough to say, I'm going to take on this project and I'm going to work side by side with you on this, or a lot of times I'm taking a design project and working with our engineering team, or I'm taking a design project that's working with our marketing team. So I'm working alongside other members of my team. I'm not taking a design project more often than not that's working with other designers. I'm taking a design project that's going to put me in a project with other members of my team that don't do what I do, because designers are going to know really well from just looking at what we share as a team. We do weekly share outs of our work and daily check-ins of what we're working on and stuff. They're going to know what I'm doing based on that because they're the subject matter experts. So a lot of times I'm taking the projects that are specifically going to put me in touch with the teams where I'm not the subject matter expert. So I can, number one, be in a team room with them, be in client meetings with them, see what they're doing, see how they're interacting with people, see maybe where the gaps are that I may not have known if I hadn't been seeing how they work day to day, because they may not see them as gaps, but I, from my experience, know I can make this easier on them. So a lot of times that's what I'm doing when I take design projects, is I'm taking design projects that are interacting with other members of the team. So number one, they're seeing I'm a team player, but also I'm seeing their side of the team that I may not be as familiar with. So that's how I do it within my organization, because we do have design, marketing, engineering, and we have sales teams. I hate sales. Do go out on sales calls. I'd still do that kind of stuff too. And so that's kind of how I approach that, more so embedding in existing teams that are cross-discipline can really help that as well. And even if it's just a small project, or even if it's just a small part of a project you take on, I think for me, it's been hugely valuable in my leadership style, because I'm not a hands-off leader, but I'm not a micromanager, right? And so you have to find, and I'm happy that I'm not a micromanager, because those are the types of managers that drive me personally bananas. So I have to find ways to, micromanagers are into everything for a fear, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line of it. They're afraid of letting go because they just don't know what they don't know. And I found most of my bosses who micromanaged design didn't have a clue about design. So they were fearful of letting it go. And so I don't want to ever get fearful of letting my marketing team work on a social media project. So if I'm working alongside them on something, I am now understanding more of what they do. Then I'm much more confident in saying, I know you guys are more than capable of this. So that's how I approach it in our company, versus trying to micromanage a process I don't understand. I'm trying to embed myself into that process so I understand enough to know what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think micromanagement, to me, I think fear is definitely an element. I think for me, it's always been a trust issue as well. Maybe.
Yeah, I think
jointly.
Those are two sides of the same.
Yeah, they can be. Coin. I think it depends on the individual leader, doesn't it? To an extent. No, I mean, I love that approach, and it sounds like it's working really well as well. So that's some great advice for anyone in the audience.
Yeah, and I also want to caveat, these are all people I work with before too. So I'm in a really unique position. I think we've introduced 2 people in the 4 years that I didn't have any working collaboration with before. So that's a unique perspective as a founder of a company, that you're not walking completely blind into the personalities too. I want to make sure people understand that that's probably a unique situation of this particular company and how I work, is that we had all worked together in some capacity before.
It's an interesting caveat, maybe, but I don't think that necessarily means it wouldn't work for any other situation.
Yeah, I just say that because I think it was easier for me to get to that level of understanding quicker. But yeah, I think you can definitely do that. I think you have to do that on some level. You have to be deliberate in building your relationships and your understanding of your team's capacity, or you're never going to be able to help them grow their capacity. If you sit in a corner and all you do is talk to them once a week in a one-on-one, and you don't look at their work and you don't give them feedback on their work, and you don't understand where their struggles and their low points are, you're never going to be able to help them be better. And I think that's a huge part of what I've been able to do going into the projects and being involved in these projects, right? Is the idea of, I can see where you're struggling, even though you might not see where you're struggling. And I can say, okay, now I know where you're struggling. Now I know where to point you to kind of fill your gaps in. And if you're in that ivory tower, you're not going to do that. So yeah, I had a little bit of a head start with that, but you can definitely do what I did. And where it might have taken me 3 months to kind of get my head around my team's skill set, because I'd also worked with them outside of it. It might take you 6 months, but it's 6 months well spent to fully understand the scope of your team, to help them develop into who they need to be. And, right now we're doing end of the year stuff. And the first thing I ask them is, what kind of skill set do you want to have at the end of 2025? We have people learning After Effects. We have people who want to learn to code. We have people who want to get into our sales funnels and help with sales. And now that I know where they want to grow, that's what we focus on for the next year. So I'll put the engineer with our sales team. I'll put them on that, but you're not going to know that if you sit in the corner and don't engage with your team. So finding whatever way is meaningful engagement for you and your team. That's what it is for us. That's what's worked for me as a leader, and that's what's worked for my team, for them to see me involved. That's really been important to them. But that may not be your team. Your team may be distributed all over like 6 time zones, and you may not be able to do that. But finding a meaningful way to show your team you're available, I think, in whatever form that takes, is never going to be a lost effort.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that starting with a question approach as well can be super powerful. And, like the personal development example you've given is a great one. I think that's a question every manager, every leader should be asking their people, what do you want to achieve by the end of next year? And then the follow-up question, what can I do to support you in that? What help do you need from me?
That's exactly it.
Those 2 questions I think are good to ask in any context. So if you are that leader who doesn't necessarily have a specialism, because sometimes that does happen, or if you just don't share a specialism with anyone in the team at all and it's not even slightly relevant, that can be quite a daunting situation to be in. I've been in that situation and it is uncomfortable.
Ooh, I don't think I'd ever put myself in that situation.
Sometimes you don't have a choice.
Like I said, I'm incredibly blessed of how this company was built, because I have plenty of friends who run agencies and who've done startups who've had a much rougher go. But I know I'm blessed that I'm working with people I already knew. And that's definitely a definite benefit to all the things. But like you said, everything I've mentioned I do, you can definitely do without having any knowledge of your team, right? I think the hardest daunting thing as a leader is coming into an existing team. And I've done that. Shortly, about a year into the pandemic, I went into a company where I was just supposed to be helping them get some design stuff done as an individual contributor. So I went in as me, Catherine, the designer, not the agency. And I walked in and I went, okay, I'm going to work with this company. They're a big company that does a lot of stuff around electronic health records. And I went in and I said, okay, great. I'm going to just kind of help you guys get this team sorted until you find a new leader. This is great. This is fantastic. 3 days into my contract, I get an email saying, welcome, Catherine. She's now leading this team that's building the biggest feature in the thing, how to chart patient data and how to document patient data. So it's like the biggest thing. 3 days into my contract, I have 12 very disgruntled designers who were pissed at their last manager. 3 days into a contract where I wasn't supposed to be leading anything. I was just supposed
Did
to come
they really
in,
just send the email with no warning? Like you didn't know it was coming?
Sent the email.
Wow. Well, that's a red flag right there.
No, it was actually, believe it or not, it was actually one of the best jobs I've ever had. And that was all from my man. No, it sounds counterintuitive, right?
It does a bit, yeah.
I had one of the best managers I've ever had in that job.
Okay, well, fair enough.
100% equivocally had my back throughout that entire crazy process. Number one, he explained to me why. First off, sorry to do that to you. I didn't have a choice. I was pissed I had to do it that way. I wanted to talk to you, but you're in California and we're in Kansas City, and that's 3 hours difference. They just made me do it. So he was not happy with the outcome of the thing to begin with. Number two, he's like, I know you don't know anything about anything. I'm here to have your back 100%. We hired you. We thought you could do this because of what you've been doing with your organization, and we want someone to come in and rattle chairs. That was his exact wording. So go forth and do whatever you need to do in that situation. And I've 100% got your back. And for the year I was there, he 100% had my back. And so walking into a really stressful situation, I had to fire somebody the first day I was a leader. I had to get somebody fired. Because he was pissing everybody off. I walked in and the first thing everyone did in our one-on-one meetings was talk about how miserable this guy was. And he was more miserable that I got the job than he did. So he was extra pissed at me. So the first day I had to fire someone. But honestly, even in that chaotic situation, that manager, his name was Justin, made all the difference in how I got through that job. And he, even though he's not like my lead mentor who's guided my stuff, he de-escalated me in so many stressful situations just by calming voice, calming tone, letting me vent, letting me just get it out, that I think I took a lot from that into what I do now. Even though, yeah, getting a promotion like that 3 days into a job when you don't even know what you're building was probably, the work itself was the most stressful work I've ever done. Leading a team, I went from being an individual contributor to having literally my 15 designers at work for me and 12 designers at this company reporting to me in the course of 72 hours. So I went from having 15 people to 27 people reporting to me without really being prepared for it. But that job was one of the best jobs I ever had because I felt 100% supported in whatever I decided to do as a leader. And I take that moving forward. And I think a lot of what I've mentioned to you is partially from that experience. So yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but it was one of the best jobs I had because of him. So that's what I strive to be in my team. Your work can be stressful, but who you work with shouldn't be. Who you work for shouldn't be. There's a difference in that. And I hope that's what I give to my team.
Yeah, no, I love that distinction. It's all important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, bringing us back to that resilient word again, I mean, that situation sounds like a great place to exercise some resilience for a start.
It was chaos. It was absolute chaos, but I also had other great leaders who were leading other product teams as well. So I think the leadership is what got me through that job. But and this is also the job where I learned that I can't be a designer in an ivory tower. I was there for a year and I didn't do any design work for a year. All I was doing was getting this team out of turmoil for 12 months because the turmoil in that team took a lot of unwinding. The processes in that team were broken. The manager just wouldn't show up to meetings, wouldn't show up for days on end. So there was tons of mess. So I just spent 12 months being a leader and not doing what I love. And that was a job where I will never be a leader without being an individual contributor because there's no way I could do this for another 12. I was miserable in the fact that I wasn't creating something and helping my team get to their goal in some form or fashion. I was. In retrospect, I know I was doing it differently than what fed my soul, right? Being in those meetings and speaking up for their rights and speaking up for what they needed was helping them reach their goals. But being creative is what helps me reach mine. So that was the project where I went, I will never not have my hands in something creative professionally again. You know, even though I have creative stuff outside, there's something different. And there's something different about presenting to your team that you're not just doing that. That's where I learned that. For sure. And that was 12 months. That was crazy. It was insane. I left because I wasn't happy in the end of it. I'd pushed myself too far. I'd worked out. I burned out is really what it was. But in retrospect, there was nothing I would do differently because that's just what was needed to get that team on track, was a really solid, really aggressive, really focused leader. And there was nothing that job was going to have a timeline for me no matter what. That wasn't going to be something I was going to do for 10 years. Number one, I don't look at work that way. We're always working on different projects and the freelancer mentality is still in here. So I don't look at work that way. But yeah, no, I asked to be let out of my contract like 3 months early because I'd signed another 6 month. I signed a 6 month contract, and then I'd signed another 6 month contract and was like, I can't do it. And he's like, we really want you to stay. Is there anything we can do to make it different? I'm like, you have to let me design. And I don't think at this point, now that they've seen me as a leader, they're going to just take me taking a demotion and going back to design. If you can make that work, I'd be all for it, but I just don't think that's going to work. And so I left, but I learned a lot from that. And I learned that I am good under pressure, but I don't want to be under pressure like that. I can do it, but like I said, it's going to have a shelf life. And I tell my clients that all the time. And I tell my team that I might ask you to work hard for a month or two, but I'm never going to ask you to work hard longer than you're capable of doing it. There's always going to be times, and you have to be realistic with your team, that we're going to need you to push hard. But I'm never going to put you in a cycle where that's all you're doing. If you work hard for me for 6 months on a project and you're churning and you're grooving and you're working really hard, the next project's going to be easy for you because I know how hard you worked on that. Where people in leadership get really tied up, that I've noticed in my industry, especially in design for tech, is that cycle never stops. You don't give your team a break. You don't give your team a minute to just acknowledge their accomplishments of what they've accomplished. When my team has done something great, I put something in our Slack. Hey, this was fantastic. I want to just acknowledge you busted your butt and worked extra hours this week. But when you get in that churn of, I've got to make money, I've got to make money, I've got to make money, I've got to pay payroll, got to do with this, got to do that. You're passing your anxiety onto your team when that's not what you should be doing. And that job taught me a lot of that. It was chaos. It was definitely chaos. But it also gave me a lot of chance to help them all grow. I was doing one-on-ones with them, and I was figuring out what they wanted to be. And all of that team has gone on to senior design roles in other companies or with that company. And I feel really proud of that. But I was done. I didn't work for 3 months after that job. I was toast.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But it's good that you recognize that. And
yeah, I think having burnout yourself makes you a more compassionate leader. Nobody should get to being a compassionate leader from being burned out, but I think it definitely gives me a different perspective. That job definitely gave me a different perspective of what that is.
It's not the route I'd recommend to learning that sort of skill, but yeah, you're right. No. It definitely makes you look at it differently in the future.
For sure. Yeah, no, I didn't even look for a job for 3 months after that. I was like, I need a minute. And we were coming out of the pandemic around the same time I left the job. So to give you a timeline, the vaccines came out right as I was ending that job. So, we were getting back into normal. I didn't know what normal was going to be. I didn't know, that job was also super, super stressful on me from a health perspective because stress exacerbates some of my health conditions. So that was not really good. And like I said, I had the best manager to show me what to do, and I had the worst job to show me what not to do. It was a really weird combination, but it really was a lot of, okay, this is what, if I'm going to be a leader, this is the kind of leader I want to be. And this is what I never want to put my team through. So.
Yeah, quite a good way though, isn't it? I guess an intensive leadership course in the course of a year.
Yeah, it's really what it was. And especially, I think especially with Justin. Justin was one of these bosses who I think I mimic out of all my bosses the most. I probably mimic a lot of him, probably more than almost anyone else, because of the way he both let you vent, but then also held you accountable. Also understood my position very intently, that he threw me under a bus by no fault of his own, but he had to throw me under a bus, and that I was drowning for the better part of a year trying to figure out what to do. But his thought process is you're the person from the outside who comes in with all this experience that we need to implement. So he expected the job to be stressful. He told me he expected the job to be stressful, but he would always be right there beside me. So anytime I needed him, he would jump out of a meeting to jump into a meeting with me. He would respond to when I say, okay, Justin, I can't respond to this. I'm pissed. Can you respond to this for me? Because he was on the chain. He's like, I got you. He had my back in just such meaningful ways that also helped me grow as a leader, to be able to say, Catherine, they're your team. Do with them what you need to do to get them to be successful. They're your team. I've got you. But the work itself was chaos because it was left in chaos. The manager before me didn't manage. So it was 12 months of cleaning up chaos, putting in processes in place. For my designers out there who understand the design process, they didn't have stand-ups in place. They didn't have design reviews in place. They didn't have one-on-ones in place. They had no process of getting their work reviewed by their peers. There was just a lot of mess to clean up. That was stressful. So that's the stuff that I brought in going, okay, as a team, I need to make sure all these ducks are in a row that I wasn't really thinking about with my team and my company because it wasn't really needed at that point, but I want to make sure it was in place before it was needed. And now all those things I learned in that job are things we rely on in our company. So, stress is not, I never want to say stress is always a bad thing. Sometimes stress is what you need to grow. And that was one of those instances for sure.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, isn't it, with stress? The two tipping points for me when it becomes bad, because I think you're right, it's necessary, isn't it? Because otherwise, if there's no stress in anything, nobody's ever going to meet a deadline for a start, are they? So you've got to have a certain level of it, and I think that's normal and acceptable. But I think the two tipping points for me are, one is the source of it. There's some things that shouldn't cause stress, as you said. The people you work with is one of those, definitely. Although, yeah, I mean, that's a bit idealistic, isn't it? Because when is that ever going to be true?
On a good team, it should be true. As a team, you should be taught to respect each other's differences as much as you are to respect your similarities. And that comes from a leadership position, right? If I'm not putting up with that crap, I'm not expecting you to give it to somebody else. And I think, do you get along with everyone all the time? No. But I do think it should be more of a culture of that being more often than not, that you're respecting differences than not. So an example, the guy we had to fire was not happening, no matter how many times he was told it was not happening, right? There's a difference, I think, and there's also a difference of stressing from the perspective of, how do I want to phrase this? Telling someone their work is bad or their work needs improvement and telling them they're bad, I guess is the way I phrase that too. Right. And some people will intertwine those two things as being the same and will assume this person doesn't like them or this person is hard to work with, when if you untangle it, that may not always be true. But no, you're not always going to get along. My general thing with my team is you're not always going to get along with each other, but you're damn well going to respect each other in your disagreements, right? You're not going to if your disagreement about the work is the work, keep it there. Don't make it a personal attack. If you don't like the direction the work is going, speak to the work. Don't speak to the person. And a lot of times that can handle a lot of that friction. Not always. You're not going to like everybody. But if you can make sure they're separating those two things, sometimes that'll handle a lot of things that are perceived personal that aren't.
Absolutely. I think the only thing I would say is sometimes it's not within our control who the people that we're working with are. And so I think that's where I was coming from, really, about, how often is that going to be achievable? And
the thing is, for me, that's not true, because I do get to choose who we work with.
Exactly. And we're very fortunate in that, aren't we? But not everyone is, sadly.
I've been in those situations, so I get them.
I think everyone has, haven't they? And anyone who's ever had a job.
Yeah. I think anybody who's been working for any amount of time has some sort of horror story.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think you're right, though, in what you say to your own team about the respect each other. I think even when things are completely outside of our control, and even if we're not leaders, but we're working in that kind of high friction environment, that's a good lesson, I think, to keep in mind. And I think it will help. Even if it's not reciprocated, it'll at least help you sleep at night.
Yeah. We are letting go of a very difficult client in the next week. And the people who've been working on that project, I've always told them, I said, you just have to respect the fact he's a human who's just grumpy. That's just what I tell him. He's just an asshole. I'm sorry. I can't do anything about that. But all we can do, what's in our control in this situation, is how we interact with him. Right? Interact with him with the respect of, you're doing work for him. You're trying to get it to the point where you need it to be to hand it off to him in 10 days. And if he wants to continue to be a grump, your answer is, well, I have now done what I am told that I can do. Please talk to Catherine. That goes back to being the umbrella, the garbage disposal, my team came into it with having a lot of startup and tech experience anyway. So it's not a lot of things I have to tell them, but sometimes, especially with hard clients like the one we're ending with this year, sometimes it gets lost. Sometimes you just want to scream. And that's when they come to me and they scream, and I'm perfectly fine to listen to them vent. the first thing I'll say in meetings, which came from an old boss, is any traumas, dramas, or things you need to get off your chest. That's like the first 20 minutes of the meeting. I just let my team vent. Same thing in our one-on-ones. Any traumas, dramas, or things you need to get off your chest, so they can just feel like they have a place to go, so they don't have to take it out on the clients. They don't have to take it out on each other. They can take it out on me. I'm fine with that, because a lot of times what they're frustrated with, I can do something about. Not always, but sometimes I can at least listen, and that's sometimes just enough.
Yeah. And actually, I think sometimes, a lot of times, that is one of the most powerful ways that a leader can help when someone is under stress, is just be there and listen and let them vent, and don't judge what they say. Don't throw it back in their face next week, anything like that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would add to that is always follow it up with, are you looking for solutions, or are you just looking to vent? Understand what they want to get out of it, right? Right? If they just need to vent at me for 10 minutes and they're fine, that's great. I'm good with that. I've got my business partner and my best friend. They listen to me constantly vent about the BS I put up with running this company, right? And so that's also another thing that you can ask, okay, you're really high strung right now. Are you just needing to let it go, or are you looking for me to help you find a solution? Either way, I'm fine. Just tell me what you need from me in this situation, right? And that's a very active listening thing. That's a therapy thing, that, a therapeutic modality type of situation. But sometimes that's all they need, is they just need to vent. And then they're like, oh my God, somebody heard me. I'm good. And sometimes it's like, this is screwed up and I don't know what to do. And just asking them which one it is. Sometimes I've had people shocked that I've asked. Like, literally, we've been in a one-on-one and I'm like, they're venting and I'm like, okay, so did you just need me to hear that, or would you like me to do something? Because I've got a couple ideas if you want me to help you, but I also don't want to step into boundaries that you have that you may not need. And she was like, you mean you got an idea of how to help? And I'm like, yeah, if you would like to hear it. But also, if all you needed was venting, I'm good with that. And you need to be a sounding board for your team, so they don't then turn around and take it out on their fellow coworkers, on your clients, on their cat, their dog, their kid, their husband. Because sometimes work sucks. Sometimes you just do need to let it go. And sometimes it's all you need. And so always following it up with that, traumas, dramas, things you need to get off your chest. And then once they've done that, did you just need me to listen, or do you need some help with it? And that just shows that you're listening and you care. And sometimes just listening goes a long way to just letting it out. And I've done a lot of that with this project over the last month, where it's just a lot of listening and screaming, because we all know he's not going to change. We all know we're good at the end of the year. So, and the conversations that I've had with him directly have been much more pointed, much more of that aggressive, stop it, knock it off kind of conversations, because I've got 6 people working on this project and none of them are happy. So that's when that more aggressive, assertive leader has to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the protective side of it. No, I mean, I love that additional question, and I think it's, the other reason why I think it's so important is quite often we as leaders, as managers, when we're in that situation, we feel the need to fix it, but quite often that's not, as you say, that's not what the other person wants or needs. And so, but it's so easy, isn't it? Because, I'm the manager, I know the answer, I'm going to solve the problem. Yep. And that's a particularly male thing as well. I think we're a lot worse at it.
No, I think it's a leader thing in general. I've had women.
Yeah. Men are definitely worse for doing it without asking, if you know what I mean.
I think women, if I'm going to stereotype my gender, we're much more the caring, we want to take care of you people. So in that regards, I think caring, wanting to take care of you turns into wanting to fix it. Where I think with guys, it's, I can fix it. I know I can fix it. It's a little more males, assertive, aggressive part of it. But I think with women in leadership and women in general, I think are taught to be that nurturing, kind person. So that's where our need to want to fix it comes from. But I had that said to me in a meeting. Justin said that to me in a meeting. Like, those were 2 things I learned from Justin in that situation, that crazy leadership situation, where it's like, do you want help, or do you just need to vent? I'm here either way, right? And I never had a manager just listen, because I'm just a person who just needs to get it off my chest. I don't need you to fix it. I just need to get it off my chest so I can go back and fix it. So when he started saying that to me on, like, in every check-in he'd do with me, and every time we'd have a one-on-one, I felt heard and seen in the way I needed to be heard and seen, because I didn't want him jumping in and fixing it, because my thought was, I've been a leader for 5 seconds. I don't need my boss coming in and undermining that. I just need to be heard that it's really annoying me right now. And that was very powerful for me. So taking that into my team moving forward, I say that a lot to people. I'm like, and now my team just knows. Sometimes they'll just start off with, hey, I just need to vent a second. Or, hey, I really am angry right now and I need your help. Now they know that I'm good either way. A lot of times they bring it into the conversation in the way they need it. So they're empowered by my bringing that into the conversations early on in our relationships, that now they know, oh, I just need to vent. I'll take 5 minutes with Catherine to vent, or I need to vent and I need help. And they now more often than not will bring their problems to me with that framework already in place.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And it is a surprising question to hear. I don't think any manager I've ever worked for has asked me a question like that.
No, Justin was 20 years into my career. And that was the first time I'd ever heard someone ask me that.
Yeah. I think quite a lot of the time as well, I mean, speaking for myself at least, if I'm venting, it's usually because I know what the answer is, but I don't want to do it. And so I'm looking for validation so I don't have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why you ask the question, do you want me to do something for you?
Yeah,
or do you just need to get it off your chest, right?
But I don't want to do it myself either. Like
yeah, right. And then that can also be, I think also that can be a way you can ask for help without asking for help, right?
True.
Sometimes people don't want to ask their boss for help because they're seen as weak. They're afraid they're going to lose their job. Whatever negative attachment showing that you need help has been attached to your own personal career experience. And I can tell you in mine, as a woman in a male-dominated industry, asking for help was the hardest thing I learned how to do, because I always saw my gender. It was never blatantly put on me. No, I won't say it never. It was very rarely blatantly put on me that I'm a woman in a male-dominated industry. It was in subtle ways, but not like the way I put it on myself. So asking for help was always something that was really hard for me to do, because I always felt one step behind everyone because I was a female in a male-dominated industry. I started off in engineering and coding, so even more so. Less so as I got into design, but more so in engineering. And so sometimes just being asked if you need help will allow you to ask for that help. Like you said, if you don't want to do it and I'm asking you, do you need my help with it? That takes it off of me in a way that I don't have to physically ask. Well, since you asked, please help me, right? Versus I need to come to you and go, I'm struggling here, right? And sometimes just having that proactive permission sometimes will let you say, I don't want to do this, or I'm scared to do it, or I don't know how to do it. Versus coming in and being the one to ask of your manager can be super hard. But sometimes if your manager is more proactive about asking what your needs are in these situations that are tough for you, then sometimes I found with my teams, at least, that it's easier for them when you're asking the question as, hey, I'm here for you, let me know. And it's not a magic cure-all that's going to fix everything. But when you know a manager has sympathy to ask if you need their help, sometimes it's easier over time when you build that relationship with that manager to go, okay, they're here in my corner. I don't have to be afraid to ask for help because they're constantly offering it to me, where sometimes going in to a person of power, and I hate that I am that, but that is what I am in this situation, and asking for help can be the most vulnerable thing someone can do. So as a manager, if you can take the stigma off that being a vulnerable thing that they can do by asking a question like, do you need help with that? Then they're not always, and it does take time, but it's always going to be a little easier to kind of step your foot into I do need help with that, versus, oh my God, I have to go ask my boss for help. Well, my boss has always been available and always said, always let me vent and always been able to help. So
going back to stress versus burnout, I think the second thing I was going to say about the nature of that stress, I think, is that second tipping point is duration. So for me, I think a prolonged, sustained period of stress, if it's more than a month, that's probably where you're hitting that point. For me, anyway, it's always been. I mean, I know there's others, people I've read about who thrive on this stress and they can do it for years on end. I'm not sure I believe years plural is possible.
I can. I'm not.
But you did burn out, though.
But I do eventually burn out. I mean, can I put up with it for years? Yeah, but there's no way you can put up with stress for an inordinate amount of time without eventually burning out. Some of us have longer fuses than others, right?
Yeah.
A month, I'm like, I can do a month of stress. Like, my projects are always inherently stressful because of the kind of work I do. 3-6 months of stress, I'm good. I'm good with that, right? Because most of the projects I walk into and I walk my team into have a set beginning and end. They have a set thing we're hired to do. We're walking through that process. We're to the end of a process. I can do anything when I know where the finish line is, whether that's 6 months, a year out, right? The job I burned out in had no end in sight. So for me, that's what eventually got me stressed. Well, number one, I was in a leadership position that I didn't want, didn't ask for, got thrown on me unprepared. That's a level of stress no sane person would put up with. But I said, I'll give it a go. Okay, because I can do it for a short period of time. But when they're like, okay, we want to bring you on full time in this role, we want to add more responsibility to your role and add more people to your team, and that's the long-term vision. I went, I can't keep this up forever. And that's when I realized I was burned out in that capacity because I wasn't properly prepared I did not see that finish line. Now, the kind of work we do as an agency is much more, I can hunker down for 3 months. I can hunker down for 6 months. I can hunker down and do this particular type of work for this particular amount of time. And then know that the next thing I can take might be something that's a little easier. So running an agency is a much different situation than working in corporate America, where there's no end in sight and you're just there for the duration. So that's why I say I can do it for long periods of time, because our long periods of time are not till I retire when I'm 60, or our periods of time are time boxed into a specific engagement with a client. So it's a little different. Where I burned out was when I didn't have that end in sight and they threw me under the bus without my knowledge or my participation. And I had a team that was really dysfunctional, and I had a lot of things that added to that stress, and then not being able to see a finish line of where I was going to be able to end this well, that was the toast. That was where I was toast. If they had said, okay, we need you to manage this team for another 6 months, and we'll just keep reevaluating this every 6 months, I'd probably still be there. But that's not what they were looking for. And I could not work without seeing a finish line under that level of stress. But if that level of stress had been put on me for another 6 months in a chunk, and I could reevaluate at the end of that 6 months and see if it was working for me or not, I would probably still be there, because I would be able to work in sprints and see finish lines. But that's not what they needed. And realistically, I think in retrospect, probably burned out in that job one way or another. So there's lots of external things that are very different than how we run our company. So yeah, I can. I've also been in graduate school for the last year and a half and running a business and doing design work. I do love being busy, but I love being busy on my terms, meaning all of those things have end dates. My semesters have end dates. My projects are 3 to 6 months on average. That's how I can handle the stress for long periods of time. So one set of stress for 3 months, another set of stress for 6 months, another set of stress for 3 months. They're different enough that they keep me engaged, but they're all stressful. As a boss, they're all stressful, but they're different. And so that's why I run an agency. That's why I always freelance, because you can run 26 miles if you just put one foot in front of another. That's a marathon for 26 miles. That's kind of the way I approach work. That's also why I've never really done a project longer than 18 months, because 18 months is kind of what I know my own personal limit to be for stress. It's the longest I've ever worked anywhere. It's on any project. So I think that's different.
Yeah, it's a really good point about knowing the end date. And yeah, that would definitely help most people cope, I think.
Leadership Heroes.
So there's only one question that everyone has to answer. It's like a requirement of being on the show. And that's the last question. I think you've probably already alluded to who your answer is going to be, but I'll ask you anyway. So it's leadership heroes. If you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but that person has to be someone who, in your opinion, perfectly embodies leadership. So who would that be and why?
That would be my first design, my first design job back in 2002. I worked for a little company that did DVD covers and VHS covers and stuff for action sports. So these were like the early X Games videos and the early skating video, not like super early skating videos, but like skating videos and stuff like that. And I had an amazing boss. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I kind of just fell into design through another window. And she was amazing at being firm in what she needed from me, but also instructional. And really, guiding me throughout how to become a print designer, which is kind of how I started designing, uh, was more for print than for tech. And she was amazing in the fact that she took me from where I was to where she needed me to be, but it never felt like I was being pulled in that direction. It was always, what do you want to do? And what do you want to be? Her name's Alyssa. And she's still someone, even 20 years later, I still will reach out to when I'm struggling. And she's like a second mom to me, and I love her to death. And really, what she's given me throughout my career is that sounding board, right? That we were talking about. From the earliest days of, I don't know how to do this, to guiding me through that, to she runs a print shop, a very successful print shop. They do large scale printing. How do I manage this team of people? How do I make sure everyone's getting paid on time? You know, the logistics of running a company. She's kind of guided me through all of that, you know, and she's given me some of the best advice, along with my dad and my mom, who also ran businesses, you know, just some of the best practical advice. Get an accountant, set up your taxes right, you know, make sure you're doing this and that and this and that. And so she's been the practical and the emotional. She's my emotional support human for sure. She's still the first person that I will go to when I'm struggling with something financially. She's also who I'm going to spend Christmas with. You know, she's also my mom. I'm godmother to one of her kids and stuff. So it went beyond just the business, but she's still someone I can always call, even though she's long since her son runs the business. She's kind of in semi-retirement now, but she's still someone who I value her opinion, and I value her opinion because of the way she helped me. You know, it wasn't a dictatorial, like we were talking about, it wasn't a dictatorial manager boss relationship, and it very well could have been. You know, she was doing things that required a high level of accuracy and a high level of detail when we were working in the print shop. And, you know, she always saw the mistakes as opportunities to grow. It was never yelling. It was never screaming. It was always guiding. It was a lot of jokes that would be highly inappropriate today, which I appreciate. Her PC level, non-existent, which I also appreciate in her. I very much like that as well. But she really was the woman who said, you can do this if you put the work in and you learn. I wasn't sure design is what I wanted to do when I started. I actually started as a tech writer, went into development, and then kind of fell into design through a series of things that I can only say were some sort of universe intervention, godly intervention, if that's what you believe. That's not what I believe, but it was some sort of intervention to set me on this path, was to put me in her path. And I worked with her for on and off for about 3 years and got progressively more responsibility as things went on. And I can say I wouldn't have gone back to school to get my 2-year degree in design, and I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had a nurturing boss that early on. And like I said, she's still someone I reach out to. And for me, her leadership was strong, but not overpowering. It was guiding, but not forcing. And I'd say that's the kind of leader I strive to be, because that's the kind of leader she was that kind of started this off for me.
Amazing story. And yeah, I love the answers that are like historically interesting characters or a cool fictional one. And they're always great, but I think the most meaningful ones are people you've actually worked for and you've experienced their leadership firsthand.
Yeah. And I mean, I watch things like Shark Tank, and I'm inspired by those guys who, you know, and I'm inspired by a lot of people, but the people who I think the best leaders are the ones who make imprints on you directly.
Yeah. And it's not the same, is it, otherwise?
It's not. You know, I've been fortunate enough to work in the music industry in another lifetime. I was on tour buses and selling T-shirts. I had a pretty crazy life. So I have lots of people to pull from in terms of mentors and people. But it never, you know, the first one to set me on this path really set my expectation of what I wanted to be as a designer and who I could be as a designer, but also who I could be as a leader. And I don't think I realized that until the last 5-6 years, of becoming a real leader of a team of people, that I really took a lot of what she said into how I deal with people in general professionally. And I told her that over the last few years since this chaos of being a business owner started, that I hope I'm half as good as she was as a boss, because I wouldn't be where I am today without her. And that's an important thing to also tell people. Like, the best of things I have them pinned up on my wall here in my bedroom in my office, which is next door, is notes I've gotten from like my students. Hey, I got a job. I couldn't have done it without you. Or, hey, you know, thanks for bringing me on as an intern. That project got me an internship, or that internship got me my first job. You know, making that level of difference is great. But unless people are telling you that, it's really, it's way more meaningful on the other side. So give your mentors their flowers when you can. They're really important people, and she knows I love her, and she knows I wouldn't be where I am without her. And I think that's really good to tell people. It's the one thing I'll leave your audience with is if you have someone who made that difference in your life, tell them, because it's just as meaningful on the other side as it is to you.
Oh, that's a great piece of advice to end on. And I think the fact that she's still such a big part of your life is testament to how great a leader she must have been. So even not knowing her, I think we've learned all we need to.
She was crazy. She was unhinged, and so am I, so it worked well.
Nice. In a good way, though, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, in a good way. So we're working in a print shop, and we're around chemicals, and we're doing heavy duty design and stuff. So you gotta keep it light. We're working with heavy machinery and printing presses and all this stuff, and she was the one who'd show up. We were on the coast of California, and she'd show up in her bikini and a parasol and say, "We're going to the beach after work today." And she'd show up in an elf costume in the middle of July because she decided it was Christmas in July. I mean, she was that kind of unhinged, and it made work so much fun. Unhinged is not necessarily a bad thing. Unhinged can bring joy, and that's the kind of unhinged she still is to this day. She's not, like I said, she's very much not PC, so you have to watch her around the little ones. But other than that, she's pretty fun.
Awesome. Well, Catherine, it's been a great conversation. We've totally lost track of time. One final thing I will ask you is if any of the listeners or viewers want to know more about you, perhaps reach out, have a conversation similar to this, where can they go to learn more? What's the website or the social links or whichever?
The website is catherinehicks.com, and I'm on Instagram as a focused design with 2 Ds. And you can find everything on the website as well. But my primary social channel is Instagram.
Lovely. All right. Well, I will pop those links in the show notes below as well so everyone can find it easily. And that's more than we've got time for, really. Sorry for taking up so much of your time, but thank you again so much for being with us.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Catherine, thank you again for being so generous with your time in that conversation. So many different topics covered, loads of great tangents, and yet we still managed to stay on that core theme of resilience and leadership. And there were some great insights, some practical, useful things that anyone in the audience can do as well from that conversation. So thank you, Catherine. Listeners and viewers, thank you to you as well for being with us today. Hope you found that useful, entertaining, enlightening even. If you would like to learn more about Catherine, as always, do check those links in the show notes, the episode description below. They're all there. Click on the things, visit the sites, follow Catherine on social media if you like as well. You'll also find the link down there to my website. It's www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. It's a new website. It was only launched at the beginning of this year. It is there to give you some insight. It is there to provide you with some leadership resources for free, including a downloadable PDF guide on how to take your first steps as a leader successfully. There's also the new leadership quiz, which I've mentioned before, but that will help you identify your own leadership hero. And of course, there is the green button on there in various places across the website that will take you to the sign-up page for my Integrity Leaders online leadership community. So if you want access to even more resources, if you want to be part of a community, gain access to that supportive environment that can be so crucial in building up resilience, among other key skills and practices that you will need to be a great leader, you can do that on that website as well. So hit that green button. And of course, as a podcast listener and supporter, you can use that 50% off discount code if you choose to join us. Again, it's in the show notes and it's probably on the screen somewhere. So that's all from me today. I hope you'll be back with us again next week for the third episode in our series on resilience, when I'll be joined by holistic wellness expert, CEO, former consultant, and all-round resilient kind of guy, Mr. Andrew Monchetto. So I hope you'll be back with us. And until then, as always, be a leader, not a boss.